Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the conference tiers as I see it. I think the four teams up top, Georgia, Texas, Alabama, and LSU, are relatively set in stone. From there, you can take your best guess. As far as I'm concerned, going into this season, it's going to be a crazy conference with a lot of disappointed fans at the end of the year. Then we got to get to players to watch because I think there's a number of guys that maybe aren't talked about on the national scale, or at the very least, not enough people know these names, and they very well should going into this season. So let's go ahead and jump into this, and let's talk about Alabama to start things off. Jalen Hale is a very interesting guy to me. When you talk about the wide receiver core over there at Alabama, it starts with Ryan Williams, of course. They brought in Isaiah Horton from the portal, who I absolutely love. I think Jeremy Bernard is going to round out the starting three for that group. I think this kid is uniquely talented. I think his athletic ability is totally different than just about everyone else on that team. I think he's going to be a guy that defenses just kind of lose track of when you're chasing around Ryan Williams and Isaiah Horton and Jeremy Bernard and all the other talented guys they have on that roster. I think Jalen Hale can have a big-time impact. Now, I don't think he's going for 1,000 yards. I don't think he's doing anything absolutely incredible, All-American level. I do think he is going to be a guy that in certain situations, in big-time games, he's going to make some huge plays. He's going to be kind of that 50-50 ball, physical receiver, but at the end of the day, I think he's someone that if you're bringing him off the bench as your fourth, you're in a really good position at the wide receiver spot, and I think he's going to take a big-time leap forward this year. Then you got Justin Jefferson in the linebacker room over there. 61 tackles, 2 sacks, a forced fumble a year ago. This is an elite player to have next to Deontay Lawson. Obviously, Deontay Lawson's going to play good football. That is not much of a question at this point over there in Tuscaloosa, but Justin Jefferson, adding him to that is huge. A very athletic, rangy linebacker that can play sideline to sideline, very aggressive in the run game, plays good enough in the pass coverage. I think Alabama's going to use a lot of 5 DB, so probably won't be asked to do too much in that respect, but he's one of those guys that I think can be really, really incredible this year, maybe even a first-team All-SEC type guy if he can put it all together, and if he does, this defense is going to be maybe one of the best in the entire country, maybe the best in the entire country. Arkansas, Omega Blake is the first guy I want to talk about. He started his career at South Carolina, as you can see, but did transfer over to Charlotte last year where he had almost 800 yards, 9 touchdowns on the year. This guy has to hit. They lost so many guys in that wide receiver room. Isaiah Satania moved on. Obviously, Andrew Armstrong moved on to the NFL. This guy's got to hit. He's got to be a big-time player for you. It's going to be a chunk offense. It's going to be one that hurts you with 20-yard plays. They're not necessarily, in my opinion, at the very least, are not going to be, fully in front of the chains every single time they're on the field. I think they're going to need some big plays, and this is probably the guy that's going to go get him. They brought in a number of transfer wide receivers, so any number of those guys could hit, but this is the one that I tend to like the most. A little bit of experience in the SEC and really had a great season for Charlotte a year ago. I think Omega Blake's got to be huge for this team. And then Xavier Sori is a guy that came over from Georgia a year ago and became the leader of this team almost immediately. 99 tackles a year ago, 2 sacks, 1 INT. He is someone that is going to be almost definitely the green dot guy for this team. He is going to be the leader of this defense, and he's got to be huge. This is not going to be a overly talented defense or one that totally just overwhelms teams. I think this is a guy that can totally change a game. I think if they use him a little bit more in the pass rush game, if he can get after the passer just a little bit more this year, I think this could be a special player and be one of the big-time reasons that, like we talked about earlier, Arkansas just catches someone on the wrong day and they give someone a big-time upset like they gave Tennessee a year ago. Auburn. Replacing Jarquez Hunter is going to be really, really hard. And Damari Alston is probably going to be the main guy to have to do that. 276 yards and 3 scores a year ago. If you're going to have to replace that guy, which I would argue has been one of the best running backs in the entire country over the last 2 or 3 years, it's probably going to be a little bit more by committee, but Damari Alston's going to be leading the way, and that is going to be a tall order for him. Obviously, you have crazy weapons on the outside, so that does help. Maybe a little bit of a lighter box for him to run into. Doesn't change that he's going to have to be really good for this team. If they don't have a run game and everyone can kind of just sit back and do a light box and still stop the run, you're going to have a problem for Auburn. There's no doubt about that. Jackson Arnold is going to start turning the ball over, and then you're going to kind of go down the same path you did a year ago. So Damari Alston is absolutely needed for this team, and I really like the ability that he has. Got to put it together for a whole season, which is going to be a tall order, no doubt about it. And then Keldrick Falk is one of the best defensive linemen in the entire country, and I don't think people talk about him nearly enough. 7 sacks a year ago, 45 tackles. He is as elite as they come. And I think when you look at Auburn going into this year, the defense is good. The defense is plenty talented, and DJ Durkin has done a nice job throughout the time that he's been there in upgrading pretty much every single year on the defensive side of the ball. The reality is I still think they're going to need an absolute difference maker. I still think they're going to need a guy that can totally take over a game, get 2 or 3 sacks, maybe a forced fumble, just really, really dominate a team on the defensive side of the ball. I think it's going to be Keldrick Falk. I don't know if they have many other choices really to take over that role other than Keldrick Falk, and they're going to win some of these big-time games that they're going to have to if they want to get to the CFP. Keldrick Falk's going to have to be an all-SEC level player. Florida, Jaden Baugh is someone that I thought the entire country knew about, and apparently they don't. There has been not nearly enough talk about this kid. He is one of the best running backs in the entire country as far as I'm concerned. 673 yards, 7 touchdowns as a freshman last year. This guy's a freak. He's an absolute freak of nature. He has Jacoby Jackson to go with him to kind of keep him healthy throughout the year and not totally run him into the ground. He's got to be able to help out DJ Lagway, especially early on in the season as he's getting a little bit more healthy and a little bit more comfortable. This guy's incredible, and he's one of those guys that I think could be an All-American guy this year if Florida can put it all together on offense. Obviously, if DJ Lagway goes out, those boxes get a little bit more stacked very quickly. So that's going to be an interesting thing to follow. But in terms of elite running back talent in this conference, you're going to be hard-pressed to find one outright better than Jaden Baugh. And then Caleb Banks on the other side, 21 tackles, 4.5 sacks, a forced fumble, a year ago, 6'6", long, physical, one of those guys that I think is going to take the world by storm this year. Now, if you're a Florida Gator fan, you feel like he's already done that. He's an incredible, incredible player, pops up on the page every single time the Gators play, but in a national sense, I don't think he's talked about nearly enough. One of the better defensive tackles in the entire country, and one of those guys, kind of like what we talked about with Keldrick Falk, although relatively different positions on that defensive line, he can totally take over games. Him and Tyreek Sapp are 2 guys that I think on that defensive line for Florida, that's part of the reason I think they could be so special this year is I think they can get after the passer, and then they're going to be able to run the football with Jaden Baugh and Jacoby Jackson, and it's going to be a really interesting team to watch. Obviously, all of it hinges on DJ Lagway, but these 2 guys will have plenty to do with that as well. Moving forward to Georgia, Colbie Young is going to be massive. I think everyone talks about Georgia's wide receiver core. They talk about Zachariah Branch and Noah Thomas and all these other guys that they brought in from the portal that are going to be big-time players, no doubt about it. This might be the best wide receiver on the roster, at least from early returns in fall camp, would suggest that. He had some tough times last year, had a little bit of a legal situation that played out throughout last year. He has been totally absolved of that, and he's really taken it seriously since he's gotten back on the field. Apparently, he's a big-time leader for this team when they very much need it in that wide receiver room. He has been playing some really, really great football at fall camp, and he's one of those guys that when he is on the field and making plays, it's very clear the physical ability. He has such a ability to go up and get 50-50 balls, is a little bit faster than I thought he was going to be, frankly, coming into Georgia, but he's one of those guys that when you have a Zachariah Branch that can make a 2-yard gain into a 60-yard gain in the second, and you have a Noah Thomas that is such a complete player, also can be a 50-50 guy. You can play around with Colbie Young as you see fit, and he's a very, very fun guy to play around with. I do think he's going to be a really special player for Georgia this upcoming year. Then you got Ella Mendoza, a guy you brought in from Army this offseason. He is fast, he is bendy, he is going to be super freed up in the pass rush game because he obviously doesn't have to play every single down for Georgia. They have about 1,000,001 guys coming off the edge this year. There are so many different guys that they're going to rotate into that position. I think Ella Mendoza is going to be as impactful as any of them. I think he's going to be a huge player on third down and pass rush. I think he's plenty good at playing the run, but it's one of those guys that if you have the ability to just unlock him on third downs, especially long third downs when he can just get after the quarterback, he could get to double-digit sacks this year. That's how good this kid is, and I think it's going to really benefit him not having to be the down-in, down-out defensive end for a team and just be able to let his raw athletic ability take over on third down. Moving over to Kentucky, the team that I'm not too high on, Jamarian Wilcox is someone I absolutely love, actually. 590 yards, 2 scores a year ago. they need a run game. If they are going to be a successful team, they're going to have to be able to run the ball effectively, give Zach Calzada a little bit of time to get comfortable or reacquainted, I should say, to the SEC style of play. And really, this is a guy that I think could be a star. I really do think he is a 1,000-yard rusher type player. Will the offensive line help him out enough is a big-time question mark. But at the end of the day, I think this guy is uniquely talented, just happens to be in a situation that maybe doesn't highlight quite as well as some of these other running backs in this conference. Then you got Alex Safari Jr., one of my favorite players in the entire country. He started over there at safety, but has kind of come down and played linebacker more lately, is officially listed as a linebacker going into this year. 62 tackles a year ago, 1.5 sacks, a very rangy player. You can play around with him a lot in the pass game, in the run game. I really like this piece. I think there's a chess piece for the defensive coordinator over there, and I think he's someone that no matter where you put him, he is going to be able to make a play very fast. One of those guys that athleticism just is off the charts for this kid. I think he's going to be a huge player for this team, and probably has to be if they're going to have any success this year. Moving forward to LSU, Chris Hilton Jr. is kind of stealing the show, kind of the same way we talked about Colbie Young. We're talking about Chris Hilton, where you have tons of transfer wide receivers, and Barry and Brown, and I'm blanking on the guy's name from Oklahoma. But at the end of the day, you have a number of guys coming in from a number of different places this upcoming year at the wide receiver position. Chris Hilton seems to be kind of balling out right now, and he's a huge player for them, a big-time down-the-field threat, one of those guys that can totally change the complexion of the game in a second. I think he's going to be huge this year. Gary Nussmeier really liked throwing to him last year. There were some drop troubles. There were a little bit of injury. He can absolutely unlock everything this year, and especially with Adam Anderson being kind of the main guy there, Barry and Brown getting a ton of attention, Nyck Anderson was what I was looking for, coming over from Oklahoma getting a ton of attention. I think this guy's going to be a huge player for LSU this year. And then Mansour Deline is a really, really interesting guy for me. I think he's going to make play after play for this team, and he really has to. He's the corner that came in from Virginia Tech, had 4 INTs, 7 pass deflections a year ago. He's going to start, and he's got to be the leader of this back end. He's got to play pretty elite football. Not necessarily, total lockdown, but when you look across the rest of the cornerback room, they have some talented guys. They also have a lot of really young guys, whether you want to talk about P.J. Woodland or Ashton Stamps or a number of other players. Mansour Deline's probably going to have to be the guy in terms of he's going to have to be on the field as consistently as any of the cornerbacks, and he's going to have to be able to hold down some elite wide receivers across this conference, including Ryan Williams and possibly, a Ryan Wingo in a SEC championship game or something like that. It's a huge player, maybe as important of a defensive player as you'll find on LSU this year. Mississippi State, the team that I'm watching very closely this year, they added Anthony Evans III, and this is a very interesting player, only 88 yards a year ago, but is a very dynamic punt returner, and is one of those guys that every time he had the ball in his hands for Georgia, it just felt like something special could possibly happen. Now, never really put it all together, obviously had some troubles getting on the field for a number of different reasons. Very talented kid, and he will get on the field for Mississippi State this year. I think he's going to be one of the main targets right next to Brennan Thompson, and I just think this guy has a lot to give. I think Mississippi State, especially with Jeff Lebby, can really unlock this guy and allow him to maybe not have, a 1,000-yard season or anything crazy. I think he could be a great piece for that team, and I can almost promise you he's going to make some special teams plays this year. And then Jamil Burroughs, coming over from Alabama, just never really got his chance over there at Alabama. As you can imagine, a number of cases with Alabama defensive tackles, but 8 tackles, 1 sack a year ago. He really does need to hit. If Mississippi State's going to be an effective team and be able to pill off some of those upsets like I talked about a little bit earlier, they got to be able to stop the run and at least stay in front of the chains, at least put their defense in manageable situations, and I think those guys up front are going to be huge, especially Jamil Burroughs. Missouri is a very, very interesting team. They brought in maybe the transfer of the entire offseason, of the entire conference this offseason, Ahmad Hardy, coming over from ULM, the running back, over 1,300 yards a year ago, 13 touchdowns as a freshman. This kid's a freak, and frankly, it might have just been a misevaluation by some of those services out there because he was a freak from the get-go last year, and he is an incredible, incredible player. I think he's going to come into Missouri, maybe even lead the conference in rushing. That's something we can talk about a little bit later, but he's a very, very talented player, and one of those guys that, again, with Missouri, you breaking in a new quarterback, whether it's Pribble or Horn, you're going to have a run game. That run game is so, so important to what Missouri does. That was a big reason why they took a step back a year ago, was that run game really didn't give the pass game many openings. It's got to this year, and Ahmad Hardy is going to be a huge piece of that. And then Marvin Burks Jr. is a guy that I don't think a lot of people know the name of. You really should. He's going to be an NFL player here pretty soon, but for the meantime, he had 66 tackles, 1 INT, 2 pass deflections a year ago. He's got to be huge for this team. He is going to be tasked with covering probably the best receiver every single week, week in and week out, and in a manageable schedule. If they can get a good run game with Ahmad Hardy and a good pass defense that takes the ball away a couple of times with Marvin Burks and company, it's going to be a special team up there in Missouri. Go 10-2, go 11-1, be firmly in the CFP, and we'll see what happens from there. Obviously, a lot of other moving parts, but these two guys are going to have everything to say about what Missouri does this year. Moving forward to Oklahoma, Deion Burks just has to be healthy. If Deion Burks is on the field, he is going to be one of the better wide receivers in this entire conference. I think he's an absolute freak of nature. I think especially with a guy like John Mateer is going to be very effective after the catch. I think he is such a weapon that they can use and kind of a gadget that they can play around with depending on what they get from other wide receivers that will have to help out quite a bit. But Deion Burks is uniquely talented and one of those guys that if he didn't get injured last year, I think he takes the world by storm in different times last year. Obviously, quarterback play hurt him just a little bit as well, but I think he's going to be totally fine this year. As long as he is on the field, I think he's going to do special things for this Oklahoma football team. Jaden Jackson, the exact same thing. Now, he didn't necessarily have injury troubles last year. He was just a freshman, but this kid's a freak of nature in every sense of the word. He is going to be an absolute force this year. I don't care what offensive line he is facing, all the way up from Alabama down to, I don't know who the worst team they play is, but whoever that is, he's going to dominate them all. A very, very good player. One of those guys that's still kind of budding into a star, still kind of finding his stripes, but he's forceful in every sense of the word. He is going to be an absolute beast this year, and I think he's going to be someone that when you talk about the Oklahoma team as a whole, really, you start with that defensive line, and you really start with Jaden Jackson in a lot of cases, an incredible, incredible player that is still developing into the player that he's going to become. Ole Miss, Deuce Alexander is a really interesting name. Coming over from Wake Forest, was a very, very highly touted recruit coming out of high school. Sounds like he's turning heads. Lane Kiffin has been very, very complimentary of this kid since he's come over. They have a lot of talented players in that wide receiver room, as you can imagine. Caden Lee leading the way. Deshaun Stribling coming in from Oklahoma State. You add Harrison Wallace from Penn State. I think Deuce Alexander could steal one of those spots from one of those guys. Probably Harrison Wallace if I had to guess, but Deuce Alexander is a very, very talented kid. Maybe it won't be right away. Maybe he won't start the first game of the season, but I do think he's going to be a force for this team. Doesn't even necessarily have to be, but I do think he's going to be a big-time player for them. And then Prince Williman Mielen, taking over for his brother Princely. Obviously, you'd love to keep that level of production. Now, obviously, Prince Will is a little bit less known and less experienced in this role. Only a half sack a year ago for Nebraska. A little bit of injury stuff, some different things that went into that, but they got to unlock this kid. He has unique athletic ability, is same as his brother, and he's absolutely someone that could be a big-time force for this team that I think is looking for that big-time pass rusher. I love what Suntarine Perkins can bring to the table, but I do think there are a little bit of you kind of want to play around with him just a little bit, and it really helps when you have a Prince Williman Mielen that can just go after the quarterback. You don't have to worry about Perkins, and you can kind of play around with him as you see fit. South Carolina, if Nyck Harbor is not a big-time player this year, South Carolina is going to fall off a cliff. I'll say that as plainly as it needs to be said. They don't have the wide receiver talent around him to where he cannot miss in any way. He had 376 yards, 3 touchdowns a year ago. The big development here is he was a dual sport athlete at South Carolina for the first couple of years, playing football as well as running track. Just ridiculous speed on this kid, especially for his size. He is now fully focused on football. So is that the difference maker where he can finally make that jump that I think South Carolina fans really expected to get in his freshman year? He is finally fully focused on football, and I think He's a guy that if he doesn't hit, I think this offense could just be Lenore Sellers doing his best to keep them in games while everyone else just kind of rides on his back. But I do think Nyck Harbor has all the ability to become that elite player. I think he might be one of the more important players on this list that we're breaking down. And then Brian Thomas Jr., kind of the same talking point. Kyle Kennard walked out the door. You need someone to replace him. Obviously, Dylan Stewart's going to be a nightmare. I don't think we have to talk about Dylan Stewart too much. Everyone knows that's going to be one of the best players in the entire country. But Brian Thomas Jr., 4.5 sacks a year ago, a forced fumble. If he can take that next step forward, it's going to be as good of a duo as they had last year. As crazy as that sounds with how forceful that duo was and how good Kyle Kennard was, I do think it's one of those situations where last year it was Kyle Kennard kind of leading the way with Dylan Stewart filling in where they needed to. I think it's now Dylan Stewart leading the way with maybe Brian Thomas filling in where they kind of need him to. And this guy can turn into a superstar as well. So there is so much ability in that room for South Carolina. I think Brian Thomas is the guy that really has to unlock I don't want to say spectacular season, but a very solid season for South Carolina to be the force that they were last year in the pass rush game. Tennessee, David Sanders Jr. is the only offensive lineman I've broken down in this entire week when we're talking about predictions, but he's super important. He's starting at left tackle as a freshman for this team. This offensive line is a little bit all over the place. I do think they're going to be more than fine. I think they're going to play good football, but he's got to hit the ground running. If he doesn't, then things could get bad in a hurry, especially in a run game, because the reality is they're going to need that run game very, very aggressively. Whether it's Deshaun Bishop or Peyton Lewis or any number of guys in the backfield, they're going to need to get that going because Josh Heupel offenses don't really work if you don't have that run game going. David Sanders Jr. is going to be a huge piece of that, along with the other four guys next to him, of course, but he's taking over for a big, big name, and he's going to have to be able to step into those shoes and at the very least fill him. Not necessarily be an elite player and totally just shut down everyone, but maybe a Kelvin Banks, Will Campbell type freshman year where it looks really good at times. Sometimes there's some struggles, but overall is a very, very talented kid, and I think they paid him quite a bit of money, so he's got to be ready to roll, as we all know. And then Joshua Josephs, forgot to add the S on the end there, but 39 tackles, 1.5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles a year ago. This guy's got to be a force. You lose James Pierce Jr. to the NFL, he's now on my Atlanta Falcons, and I think you're going to have to get that production from someone because the reality is I love the back end of this defense. Without Jermon McCoy, you do have questions, and he probably won't be playing for the first couple of weeks. You're going to have to get after the quarterback, and you're going to have to get after him pretty consistently just to help out that group. I don't think they're going to need to be totally lifted up by the pass rush. I do think they're going to need just a little bit of help from time to time, and I think Joshua Josephs is going to be a huge player for that role. Texas A&M. Casey Concepcion is not a name that enough people know, and I think it's probably the fault of NC State, with all due respect to the Wolfpack. 460 yards a year ago, 6 touchdowns. The quarterback play did not quite meet the level of the wide receiver play over there for the Wolfpack a year ago. He's found his way to Texas A&M. This kid's special. He has unique speed. He's very, very shifty, and I think he's one of those guys that if you can get him the ball early and often this year, he could go for 1,000 yards. I think he is that level of player. I think he's an all-SEC level player at wide receiver, and A&M probably needs him to be that guy. You lose Noah Thomas from a year ago. You lose a number of other guys from that wide receiver room. You replaced with really, really good talent. I think this guy's going to have to be the one that leads the way in a number of different categories, and I think he very well can. I think he could have last year at NC State if things just worked out a little bit smoother at the quarterback position. And then Julian Humphrey comes over from UGA, a little bit infamous from that Ryan Williams play that made him look just a little bit goofy at times, but at the end of the day, very talented kid. He's someone that I think they need to hit. They have Will Lee on one side of the ball. He is going to be great. I have no questions about that. I think Julian Humphrey is a little bit more questionable, but he's going to have to hold down the other side. And if he can do it to a high level, this is going to be a really good back end and a very elite defense at the end of the year. And then Texas. Parker Livingstone is a guy you're going to want to know has really broken out over spring and fall camp, is one of those guys that it seemed like they were bringing in Emmett Mosley from the portal to really get a starting position. Parker Livingstone might just steal that from him. He's a very, very talented kid, has kind of gone through the process, although he's only been there 1 year, has kind of gone through the process, and they really like this kid. They're giving him a lot of reps with Team 1, and I think he's going to be a big-time player for them. Him and Arch Manning are very, very comfortable together, have a very good rapport. I think he's going to be a big time player for this football team this year. Obviously, Ryan Wingo, DeAndre Moore, all those guys lead the way, but I think Parker Livingstone is going to end up being a big time player for this team. And then Jelani McDonald. He's kind of the Andrew Makuba for this year for Texas, uniquely athletic. He was a track athlete coming out of high school, did long jump, did high jump, did sprints. Is one of the best athletes you're going to find in the SEC, and you probably don't know the name of him right now. You will. He's going to make one or two plays this year that are going to be all over SportsCenter. I can almost promise you that. Really, really good athletic ability, really rangy, can play a number of different positions. Was down in kind of the nickel position last year, is now going to be a little bit deeper at the safety position, and I think he's going to be a nightmare. I think he's going to be a very, very good player for Texas over the next 2 years. I think he hits the ground running this year. And then Vanderbilt to round this thing out. Cedric Alexander is a uniquely important player for Vanderbilt this year. When you lose some of the pieces they lost on the outside, you're going to need a good run game. And at the end of last year, it really did start to feel like people kind of caught on to what Vanderbilt was doing. Now, obviously, you can get that back this year. You can play really good football. You can get back to the run game that you love. But there was a lot of questions around this team, and I think Cedric Alexander can erase a lot of those questions. If he can up that 586 to 850, let's say, this upcoming year and do some really special things, I think this offense, while maybe not quite as potent as it was a year ago, can be very, very steady. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Martel Height is going to be a huge player for this team. 33 tackles, 1 forced fumble, 2 INTs, 4 pass deflections a year ago. This team's going to have to get takeaways. They're going to have to do what they did against Alabama, which is force some problems up front, get some big-time takeaways on the back end, and then run the clock. And these two guys are going to be super important for both sides of that. So going to be really interesting to see what they can do. If Vanderbilt's going to be a special team this year, obviously Diego Pavia is leading the way, but Martel Height and Cedric Alexander are not too far behind him. I can promise you that. So a lot of players to watch. I think there's so many guys that I didn't even have a chance to get into during that segment that are going to make big time impacts for their team, but I think that group is a really special group. I think there's wide receivers in there like Deion Burks, like Parker Livingstone, like Omega Blake, like Jalen Hale that you might not be talking about too much right now, and you'll be talking about them a lot come week 6, week 7 when we get into the SEC schedule just a little bit. So going to be really awesome to watch all of those guys develop. We'll see if any of them become outright superstars this upcoming year, and I think a couple of them have the ability to do that. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, it's all about picking superlatives. We'll give all the superlatives out: game of the year, surprise team of the year, disappointing team of the year, all that good stuff. And then finally, my conference championship matchup and my pick to win the SEC in 2025. So stick with us and we'll be right back with that.